Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm Alfonso David, counsel to the governor. Before we begin, I would like to introduce the people who have joined us at the table. Starting to my far left, Stephen Choi, the executive director for the New York Immigration Coalition. Sheila Poole, the acting commissioner for the New York State Office of Children and Family Services. And to the governor's right, Kathleen Brady-Stiffen, the Associate Executive Director for the Council of Family and Child Caring Agencies, and to her right, Dr. Howard Zucker, the Commissioner for the New York State Department of Health. As you all know, the federal administration in Washington has launched an assault on immigrant families arriving at our borders. The administration has shown a complete disregard for the Constitution and for the rights and safety of children who are being torn apart from their families. In New York, Governor Cuomo has led the fight against the Trump administration's policy, and he's led the fight to protect the rights and the well-being of children who have been separated from their families. The governor has been working tirelessly to protect these children and ensure that they're reunited with their families. And today, we are taking additional steps to ensure that children in New York are receiving the care that they need and that they deserve. It's my pleasure to welcome Governor Cuomo, who will outline those steps.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank Alfonso David, the counsel, who's been doing great work. I'd also like to thank the commissioners, Commissioner Poole and Commissioner Zucker, who have really stepped up and been extraordinarily helpful, and Kathleen Brady-Stiffen and Stephen Choi, who've done a great job. Stephen as an advocate for the rights of immigrants, and Kathleen representing the foster care providers. As everybody knows by now, this is a truly horrendous situation. This is either an historic example of gross incompetence of government, or it is a political tactic that would make Machiavelli blush. I'm not sure which it is. The first thing we want to do is make sure that the state is doing everything that it can do to help the situation. And Commissioner Poole and Commissioner Zucker have been very engaged in this already. But we're going to announce today several steps where the state will be intervening to do everything it can do for the children who are separated, and also for the larger population of what they call UAC, unaccompanied alien children. The state is going to dispatch any personnel services, health services, resources that foster care centers who are now caring for UAE children may need or request. We're going to provide services for immigrant children who are discharged from a foster care facility to a family member's care, what they call a sponsor's care. A sponsor can be an extended family member, etc. But the sponsor right now has no support services provided with the children. The state will step into that. Third, foster care facilities can also discharge a child to a private foster care facility, foster care home, where parents would take in a foster care child. The state will do the continuing services and connections with those children. Fourth, HHS is apparently discharging children from foster care facilities in other states to sponsors or private foster care facilities in New York. We would like HHS to tell us when they are placing children in New York so we can provide follow-up services for that child. We're going to be taking additional actions to support family reunification. As you know, we're filing a lawsuit against the federal government on this basis. But we will also be working with consul generals and other countries to try to get information to reunify families with extended family members who may be in New York. Lastly, we'll provide resources and support to provide public safety for foster care facilities that are handling children who have been separated at the border to the extent they need it. 2 points on what the President has been saying recently. Number one, the President has said he doesn't think the people who present themselves at the border should essentially have due process rights. Unfortunately for the President, there's a document called the U.S. Constitution that gets in the way of the President's desires. People have due process rights. Non-citizens, undocumented people have due process rights. One of the fundamental rights they have is the care and custody of their own child. And that's the basis for our lawsuit, that when they did these separations, they violated the right of the parent and the child. The President says, well, I don't think they should have any due process right. I know, that's what you think. The Constitution says something different. And that was the basis for the Flores consent decree that we've been talking about now for days, that protects the child's right not to be detained in one of these facilities. Second point the President is making is he wants to reunify families, but he wants to be strong on the border, right? He has that dual goal mantra: strong on the border, reunify families. He can't do both. That is a riddle that cannot be solved. You cannot have a zero-tolerance policy on the border, arrest the parents, but reunify the children with the parents. You can't do both. It's an oxymoron. If you arrest the parent now goes into a detention facility. You can't put the child in a detention facility, except under very limited circumstances, as called for in the Flores consent decree, no more than 20 days, certain conditions. So you can't reunify a child with a parent who has been arrested. The only option for the President, if you actually want to reunify families, is to stop the zero-tolerance arrest policy. That's the only option in his control. And he won't do that. Why? Because he wants to be strong on the border, right? So that's really the only option he has. Everything else is smoke. I'm going to reunify. You can't unless you stop the zero-tolerance policy started April 7th, which is what caused this entire situation in the first place. That's his only option that he can take. Second option is to go to the Congress and say, you solve it, you figure it out, you pass a law, which is what he is trying to do. If you looked at the title of the executive order said, affording Congress an opportunity to solve this problem. When I started by saying it was either gross incompetence from a governmental point of view or a Machiavellian political tactic, either this was a Department of Justice, HHS blunder of biblical proportions, or it was a Machiavellian political move because he wanted to politicize this issue all along. And he wanted to generate the tumult that he has generated on the immigration issue. Remember, this is one of the issues that helped elect this president. And it wouldn't shock me if this was a politically motivated plan to once again turn up the heat and get his political supporters energized and make the November elections about the immigration issue. It's one or the other. It was either a total gross incompetence by government because anyone had to understand the consequences of what they were doing, or it was all politics. And he wanted to generate a political issue for the campaign. Both are despicable. This is not a political issue. This is not about Democrats and Republicans. This is not about liberals and conservatives. This is the basic question of how you treat children. It's a question of humanity. It's a question of values. It's a question of decency. We're the United States of America. Statue of Liberty is in our harbor. And we're now separating children from their parents? If any other country did this, we would be the first to condemn them. We would be sending airplanes full of protesters saying, "How dare you do this? Rip a baby from the arms of her mother." It's time this country looked in the mirror. And let's remember who we are and what we are about. But we are not about this. We are not about separating families and putting children in foster care and traumatizing children, possibly for a lifetime. Not out of government incompetence and not out of Machiavellian politics. Neither justifies the harm that we're doing now. With that, we'll take questions for myself or any of our colleagues.
Governor, do you have any updates in terms of revised numbers? I know last week we were trying to kind of get your arms around how many are actually here in New York State, and I think the latest figure was up to 700.
We don't, Zach. What we know is the overall population of unaccompanied alien children, the UAC population, is actually larger than I thought. It's 1,292. We don't have a good number yet on what number within that 1,292 were separated at the border recently. And the numbers change, the 1,292. That's a snapshot on the 18th. Children come in, children go out, children are discharged. As I said, they can discharge children to a quote-unquote sponsor, which can be an extended family member, or to a private foster care facility. A private foster care facility basically being a home setting with parents who take in foster care children and get reimbursed by government.
Governor, when did these state resources start flowing? Are they already going? Did they start last week, or are they starting right now?
Dr. Zucker and Sheila Poole?
So we started last week when this crisis emerged, reaching out to all of the foster care agencies who are also serving this population of young people, connecting with them, asking if they had additional resource needs. So the dialogue has been open and continuing. Kathleen, I don't know if you would add anything from...
Yes, the foster care providers are extremely grateful for the governor's leadership on this issue. We are taking care of children in home-like settings right now. We are providing for their mental health needs. There are clinicians. And our primary goal is to reunify these children as soon as we can with their parents. In cases that the governor described, when we are going to be placing the children with sponsors who are either a family friend or a close relative, I think the governor's father used to call this the family of New York. We are going to step up and make sure that the family of New York is providing for the children once they're placed with their sponsors to meet whatever their needs are at that point.
The agencies have done a great job, by the way, under very difficult circumstances.
How are you communicating these additional services to the children and their families? And is there additional protection if the family members or sponsors that they have here are also undocumented?
Good question. You have several parties, right? You have the foster care agencies themselves. We're working with them directly. Kathleen represents the association that represents them, but they're under contract to the state of New York on other programs also. So we know who they are. We have a relationship with them. We will find out from them the discharge plan for children, whether they go to a private foster care facility or discharge to a sponsor, and then we'll work with the private foster care agency or the sponsor to provide continuing services.
Governor, a two-part question, actually. The first is...
You only get one part. It's the rule. It's on the door when you walk.
I'll try for two.
Okay.
The first question is I was taken that you said that HHS is still sending kids here to New York from other states or from wherever they're coming from. Why are they doing this without notifying the state? Is that incompetence or is that politics?
Well,
or
look,
something else?
they have no choice, right? None of the president's options are real. Everything he's saying is non-effectual. I want to reunify families. Okay, stop the zero-tolerance policy. No. Well, then you're going to continue to arrest people right now who show up we're sitting here. Someone shows up at the border with a child. They are arresting that parent, and now they have another child. And now they have to send that child somewhere. So the flow is continuing. You have foster care facilities that are discharging children and getting backfilled by HHS. It's not going to change. HHS, I don't know who actually determines the policy there, but Department of Justice, in this administration, it's the Department of Injustice. What did you think was going to happen when you announced a zero-tolerance arrest policy? You knew by the Flores consent decree that the children couldn't be in the detention center. You knew that. You knew it when you signed the executive order. If you read the executive order, it says reunification to the extent permitted by law. And then there's a little sentence in there that says Attorney General Sessions shall renegotiate the Flores consent decree. Why? Because the Flores consent decree doesn't allow them to execute the executive order.
That gets to my other question. As a matter of policy, big picture immigration policy, the Flores consent decree has bedeviled presidents from both parties for that reason. How do you secure the border? I mean, what's your opinion? What is the answer?
Look, there are programs that work. He doesn't want to talk about the programs that work, where a family is presented, the family is released intact but monitored. There are programs that place them with other families. There are programs that place them with attorneys that have 96% success rates. There are ways to release people in this country without catch and release, without losing control of them, right? We arrest hundreds of people every day in New York State. State police arrest them, NYPD arrests them, Buffalo Police Department arrests them, and they are released. They're released on bail, they're released with monitors, they're released with bracelets, but we release them and we monitor them. That's the way you could do this, but that's not what he wants to do. He wants to say, zero tolerance, we arrest everyone. Today he took it a new step. I want to arrest people, and they shouldn't have any due process rights. So I want to arrest them, and that darn Constitution, that is a really annoying document, you know. So he is getting more rabid in his anti-immigration policy. Now, this is also, in large part, what got him elected. So is it a political tactic, or is it gross incompetence? You tell me.
Governor, the tension you had spotted between the president's EO and the situation it puts the children in reunification, it ripples out to the state, right? Because if HHS now says we are going to reunify the children under the state's care, or under the care of those that the state regulates, what will the state do if the reunification means they go into detention? Will the state say no, they will stay with this foster family until the parents get released or deported? Or will they say, okay, we prioritize family reunification even if it means going to the detention center with the parent?
It would not be up to the state. Foster care agencies, for example, run some programs for the state where they get reimbursed and regulated by the state, and they run some federal programs for the Office of Refugee Placement. And that's federally reimbursed and federally regulated. There is no such thing as reunification. They would have to take a child from foster care and put that child in a detention center with their parent. They can't do that legally by the Flores decree.
But if
So there is no real reunification. The only reunification they could do is if the parent was released from the detention center because he or she is now in the process of seeking asylum, let's say, and then they could reunify. But they can't reunify in the detention center by Flores for any length of time.
If Flores gets modified, if the DOJ can make that happen, would you
They
guys
won't. I'll bet you. How much money do you have in your pocket?
None. I'm only carrying a card.
Okay. Put your credit card on the table. Whatever you want to bet. I will bet you they do not modify Flores.
So what happens?
The only thing that could happen is either the president, two options. President stops the zero tolerance policy, which I think is highly unlikely because that's his machismo and bravado, and that's the fuel for the base. Or Congress would have to pass a new law. And that's very, very difficult with this Congress. Now, to add one more fact to the conspiracy theory, the Machiavellian conspiracy theory, the president said last week the Republicans shouldn't worry about this immigration issue until after November, after we have more Republicans to pass the law that we want. What does that mean? That this issue is going to be alive through November? And every family that comes to the border between now and November is going to be put in a detention facility? And this is going to continue to percolate until November? And you're hoping to elect more Republicans based on this issue? So you have more Republicans in Congress so you can get the bill passed that you want? I mean, that would be a really frightening proposition, right? Because remember, every day, every moment a family shows up with that zero tolerance policy in effect, they're arrested, the child has to go somewhere else.
Governor, to be clear, based on the state's relationship with these foster homes and families, are you aware of more separations happening right now? Specifically aware of more separations?
There is no option right now but for them to separate any family that comes to the border.
I understand that's your read on the situation, and perhaps it's right, but do you know of, X number of new children coming to New York State?
Well, we know that children are still being brought into the state and referred by HHS on an ongoing basis. That we know. But that only follows because families are still showing up at the border. And they have no option. Their pipeline starts at the border and ends at a foster care facility, right?
Governor, how far will the state go to reunify families? Like, if it turns out that it's HHS, DHS, they're not doing it, and you have kids who ended up in the state, I guess partner agencies or whatnot, will state police go and do the research and find their parents somewhere? Or,
Yeah.
I mean, what will you do?
Yeah, we cannot reunify. Only the federal government can authorize a reunification because remember, they're in a foster care facility now pursuant to federal regulation. federal reimbursement. We will make every effort to aid in the reunification, but we're using reunification in two different ways now. Reunification means to unify again, reunification. That is with a parent. When you place a child with an extended family member, I don't call that reunification. It's locating a family member who can take custody temporarily while the parent is in detention. And the state will do whatever it can to help locate a family member who would be willing to be a sponsor for that child. Health department is going to work on it. We're working with counsel generals from other countries, public safety resources, to find a possible relative for that child. And then the relative has to be willing to take care and custody, and then the state will provide continuing services once that placement is made, but the placement has to be approved by the federal government. I don't think that's going to be a problem because the federal government is backlogged and they're looking to move children out. I think it's really about identifying a family member. But they call that reunification. That is not reunification. But that's part of the federal parlance now. We're reunifying them by finding an extended family member. That's not reunification. That's finding an extended family member who the child may have never met, and say, okay, we're now going to send you to a second cousin who lives in the Bronx. That's not reunification. That is transferring them from a traumatic situation where they landed in a foster care home to another totally foreign, alien circumstance where they're now in the care of a family member, extended family member, who they may never have met for some period of time that they don't even know could be limitless. Let me ask my colleague. Stephen, you had a point?
If I may just add, I think the governor's absolutely right. The federal government's record when it comes to actually working with these kids is abysmal. They treat this, what they call reunification, as the end of the process. They're washing their hands and they're saying, that's all the responsibility we have for this child. When in fact, it is just the beginning of the process. This child is going to have an existing legal case of deportation. They're going to have to make an affirmative case. They're going to need a lawyer. They've also often undergone tremendous trauma, whether it's physical or sexual or violent traumas. And the social work needs are incredible as well. They're going to need to figure out what it means to be a student, to be a child again. And so, the governor is absolutely right. This has been an abysmal track record of the federal government in figuring out how to deal with these kids. And the state, to its credit, is stepping up and saying, we're going to play a leadership role in making sure that this generation of refugees is going to be successful. And I would just add that every generation of refugees has been successful when we've been able to provide the right support, whether we're talking about Eastern European refugees escaping pogroms, or Cuban refugees fleeing to Florida, or Vietnamese boat people. Every single generation of refugees has always been distrusted and thought to be criminals or worse, but they've always ended up succeeding. So with the state taking leadership, I'm actually confident that this generation of refugees is going to be a huge plus. It's going to be a value add. It's going to help make this country great, and these waves of refugees have always done so for centuries. That's a fact we cannot forget.
Governor, I just wanted to bring up a point. We've talked a lot about the legal issues and the questions that come up, but at the center of all this is a child. As a pediatrician, I could tell you, as a child, the impact of this is detrimental. I mean, the consequence that we see right now, you'll see children who are not eating very well and they're not sleeping and they're agitated, but the long-term impact is emotional, intellectual, and physical impairments that will last a lifetime. And if you look into this, you'll find that in 1995, 1997, the CDC, along with some other partners, looked at something called the Adverse Childhood Experiences. It's an ACE study. And they followed these kids for 20 years or more than 20 years now. And they've looked at the impacts of stress, and they have found that hormones change, the impact of hormones and their ability to make decisions, that their actual chromosomes, the edges of their chromosomes, their DNA gets frayed and they age quicker, and they get behavioral problems, mood disorders, and anxiety and depression, so many other things that can happen. Their ability, actually even their the neurocircuitry, their brain, the wiring of their brain can change as a result of this. So the impact of what's happening to these children is so serious that we look at this, but we don't realize that the entire generation, there are even some studies that show generations from there as a result of this can be impacted as well. So I just turn back to the focus on these kids on this as well.
One other point, when we talk about the discharge of from a foster care to an extended family member, that takes care of, or actually takes care of nothing. You're now placed in the care of an extended family member who you may or may not know, and now the child still has a legal issue. The child could be subject to deportation. The child could seek asylum. Either case is a long-term, expensive journey. We were chatting with a young man who was in a foster care home. He had been there over a year pursuing an asylum case. An asylum case can go on for years. And you need counsel, and you need a place to stay. And Stephen's point, you just came from another country, and now you're placed in a foster care facility or a home or with an extended family member. You don't know the language. You have to get introduced into the education system. You have a major legal problem with uncertainty. You don't know where your parents are or what their situation is going to be. I mean, you can't have a more traumatic situation. And again, it is not stopping. And nothing the president has said will stop it. The executive order was, I think, was a PR move to make it look like he reversed course when he didn't reverse course at all. It was a political pirouette. He ended up right where he started. Oh, yes, I'm in favor of family reunification. To the extent permitted by law, Attorney General Sessions, go renegotiate Flores. By the way, until you renegotiate Flores, nothing is going to change. Has anyone heard anything on the renegotiation of Flores? No. And I have his credit card. That's why he ran out.
One more. Yes, I'm with Univision, and we know right now, Governor, there are 3 children in Cayuga Center. The mother is in a detention center in Arizona. We've spoken to the attorney, and he's trying to reach out to the children because his plan is to get her out and hopefully reunite her with the children, which is the only way, viable at this time. But he has not been able to get through to Cayuga because it seems that they're giving them the runaround. They don't really know what the procedure is. He wants to know himself what documents to have ready. As you know, Stephen, most of these people sometimes don't have all the documentation. They come from their countries free in horrible conditions. They might not have a real birth certificate, or they need to provide all that and work with the councils to do that. So he wants to be ready so that when the mom comes, he can have it done the same day, because where's she going to stay?
Sure.
She's not going to stay in his house, and who's going to pay for the plane ride if they're going to be deported? So many questions and answers. So in a case like this, what do I tell this particular attorney who's trying to navigate the system and there's no precedent for it?
Well, in this particular case, we can help you if you get the information to Alfonso. But this is what advocates like Stephen Choi do all day long, and they are overwhelmed with just these types of questions and cases over and over and over again. Yeah. The system is in chaos. There was no planning. And again, it's ongoing.
A number of years ago, the governor created the Office of New Americans. So we provide free legal services and support, and we work with Stephen's organization and others. So certainly we should talk.
Thanks, guys.
Can we speak a little more specifically on the support and the resources, the interim things? We mentioned clinical help, but can you just maybe someone break down some concrete things?
Any assistance that a foster care facility that now has a child needs, the state will provide. When a child is discharged from a foster care facility to an extended family member, we'll provide continuing services, whatever they need. Legal services, educational services, counseling, mental health. When a child is discharged to a private foster care facility, a home, but not a related home, we will provide continuing services. And we will provide reunification assistance by helping to identify extended family members. Although I don't call that reunification, the federal government does, but finding family members who could take temporary custody of a child and then provide continuing services for that family member who now took temporary custody.
So legal, educational, medical, behavioral, those are kind of the big ones?
The main categories that they would need.
Can you just clarify as well, when you find family members that can temporarily take custody for the reunification, if they are themselves undocumented, will they still receive those services and any protection in New York?
Yes.
Yes. Short answer is yes.